Well, I want to welcome everybody tonight and welcome to another Wednesday night seminar from the World Affairs Council of Maine. And I think you're going to find this one very, very interesting. When I said seminar, I really meant webinar because that's what we do. We do webinars. But the interesting thing through the magic of Zoom, as you know, we are not limited by geography. So we have Allison here as our executive director, who will act as our moderator tonight from Washington, D.C. Louise Carron, who's going to be talking to us from New York City. And then, of course, from the most exotic location, I'm talking to you from Peaks Island, Maine, off on the Atlantic Ocean. So great to have everybody here tonight, though. But this, I think we're going to enjoy this because it is quite different from the usual programs that we have for the World Affairs Council. We're tackling something you've probably heard of, but may not know much about, non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. What are these things? And I think that's what we're going to learn tonight. Why is there so much buzz around them? And what do they have to do with the global art trade? So we are the World Affairs Council, and I think it's important to throw that adjective in there, global, when we talk about the art trade. Well, we really are fortunate this evening to be joined by Louise Carron, an associate at Klaris Law, who has written extensively on topics that intersect law and the art world, including non-fungible tokens. She has graciously agreed to help us understand this blockchain-driven innovation and what it means for how art is bought and sold and how artists profit from, but also protect their intellectual property. Let me share a little bit more about Louise's background. First, Louise grew up in Paris, which I think is wonderful. I would love to grow up in Paris. Great city, where she pursued a double bachelor's in French law and common law and a master's in comparative business law. She also earned an LLM from the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law in New York with a concentration in fashion, art, media, and entertainment law. Prior to joining Klaris Law, Louise spent 3 years, and I'm going to have to flip my paper here, as the executive director for the Center of Art Law, where she ran daily operations, taught workshops on legal basics for artists, and mentored interns. She also worked on various transactional and litigation matters with Greenberger PLLC. At Klaris Law, Louise primarily focuses on contract matters, copyright use, and new technologies. However, she also advises entrepreneurs, startups, and nonprofits across creative industries. She helps artists protect their creations, rights, and legacies, work that presumably includes NFTs. Louise is a regular contributor to the Entertainment, Arts, and Sports Law Journal, published by the New York State Bar Association. She has appeared on various panels and in podcasts. She is a member of the Art Law Committee of New York City Bar Association and serves as the secretary of the Center for Art Law's Board of Directors. Thank you, Louise. It's great to have you here from New York. We are really looking forward to learning from you this evening. Before I hand things off to Allison, our executive director, who will be moderating this evening, I want to thank our sponsors, as always, for their support for our programs, especially our partners at the University of Southern Maine and the University of Maine Law School. And to our World Affairs audience, we look forward to your questions, as always, which you can submit by the Q&A or the chat box at any time. So with that, let me turn this over to Allison.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you again, Louise, for being here tonight and for sharing your expertise with us on something that it is really a new topic for many of us. It's something we hear a lot on the news, but we don't necessarily understand. And I think, like a lot of people here, I really want to start by asking you the question that we're probably all too embarrassed to ask, which is, what are NFTs? What do they have to do with art? Why do we keep hearing about them? Can you help shed some light on this here?
I can, I will try my best. It's a rabbit hole, so we'll only scratch the surface. But first, let me say thank you, Allison, thank you, Bill, thank you to everyone at the World Affairs Council of Maine for welcoming me tonight. So hang on to your socks. It's going to be a great ride through the metaverse. So on that note, let me share my screen. I hope that everyone can see. Because I am a lawyer, I have to start with the mandatory disclaimer that the following information is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice, nor does it create an attorney-client relationship. So welcome to the metaverse. You have heard about the metaverse. What does it mean? It's the world of the digital world, digital replica of the world that we're living in. You may have heard that about a year ago, Sotheby's opened their flagship or replica of their London-based flagship in Decentraland, which is one of those existing metaverses that are primarily based on blockchain. And also last year, Facebook announced that it was renaming itself as Meta. And that it was going to roll out a version of their own metaverse over the next few years. So what does that mean for us? What does it mean for art? I'm going to, talking about art, we're going to go over a few words of jargon to make sure that we're all on the same page. And we can start with really what the metaverse is. And it's a world that encompasses all new technologies that allow a user, you and me, to explore a virtual world. And it usually encompasses different technologies such as augmented reality, virtual reality, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, artificial intelligence, and of course, NFTs. And we can see a lot of these technologies come into play in the metaverse, which is kind of like some of the platforms that exist out there are kind of like, for those of you who played or who were on the platform called Second Life or who have played The Sims years ago, maybe you still are. I know there was a resurgence of a Sims player over the pandemic. It really is a way to live through a digital world. And NFTs fall into that world, so to speak, as a way to combine both blockchain and art, more specifically digital art most of the time. But what is blockchain really? And so blockchain is a technology that, as some of you may know, underlines Bitcoin, which is one of those cryptocurrencies, really the first one. And later the technology was adapted to be used across industries and other cryptocurrencies. Which essentially allows users to buy, sell, and exchange different assets that are stored digitally. And every time that asset is exchanged, it creates an immutable record of that transaction. And it adds a new line of information each time the asset is transferred. And that is through a process that we call smart contracts. And it's basically lines of code, series of if-then conditions that are immutable. And whenever someone adds a new block to that chain, the contract and the different computers validate the information. Everything is stored in that digital ledger. We'll go further into it in a few minutes, but I want you to have the basics of what blockchain mean. And you'll see other acronyms such as ETH, which is one of the cryptocurrencies that are used currently to purchase NFTs, which relies on the blockchain called Ethereum. And it drives in different concepts such as scarcity, fungibility. We'll talk about that in a second. What does it have to do with art? Technically, I mean, I know that over the last year, there's been a lot of writing about NFTs, a lot of both good and bad, but it started way before 2021. I think the first example of a non-fungible token, although it wasn't called non-fungible token at the time, is this one of these pieces by an artist called Kevin McCoy. And he really is the pioneer in the sense that he was the first one to think about creating a digital record, blockchain-based record of ownership over that particular piece of digital art. And since then, there's been a lot of instances of the CryptoPunks, which are really one of the first or major projects in that space, that basically all of these different little characters, there are millions of them, each of them have, they all have distinctive characteristics, and there's no one alike. Each of them is unique, and that is exactly what the concept of scarcity, right? It may be the rarer it is, the more interesting, and it becomes a collectible. The same way that some people collect stamps or collect baseball cards. And so the value that we attribute to those NFTs or any other collectibles is really how rare it is and what people in the community find is valuable about them. And then since then, there's been multiple, it's really, as I said, it's a rabbit hole of projects in this space. And now we're 1 year after the Beeple sale, the sale of that piece. And now the question that is on everybody's mind, and that's, you know, an article from the New York Times about, what was it, last weekend, asking, have NFTs changed artists? Have they changed art at all? And this, I'm putting this headline here. It's a very interesting piece, and I recommend for those of you who are interested to read it, because it really, I don't necessarily agree with everything, but it kind of tells you that the concept of there's no crypto art, there's basically everything that's on blockchain is just art, and there's no separate distinction between art that is on a blockchain and art that just exists digitally. So let's talk about NFTs on the technical side, and I'll try to make it as clear as possible. And the way that blockchain we're really going to talk about blockchain first, as it underlines all of these NFTs. As I said, it's a way to record transactions. It's a immutable ledger of transactions that are secured and initiated between parties, between different computers, if you will. Once the transaction is initiated, it is sent to the nodes in the network, which are basically computers that will verify the transaction using different cryptographic methods. And every time the transaction has been verified, a block with that information will be assembled, checked by the network. And once the consensus is reached, the block is added to the chain, becomes immutable, non-reversible, and a version of that block of information, that little record, exists on every computer. So the whole concept is that once the transaction has been approved, it is secured, it is recorded, and it exists, it is transparent. You can see on that block from what wallet to which wallet did that asset transfer, even though there is an added layer of anonymity, because on the ledger, on the blockchain, the owners of a particular wallet aren't necessarily public. So that's another, it both hinges on the concept of transparency, in that the transaction itself, the information concerning the transaction is transparent, but the identity of the people involved, of the parties involved in that transaction, isn't necessarily public. So it's a different concept of trust that is enacted through blockchain. Now let's talk a bit about tokens. There are different types of token, and you can think of a token like the way you would think of a casino chip, when that only has value within its own ecosystem. And it is only the value that is attributed to it by the people involved in that casino or in that blockchain that really drives its value. So on the one side, you have payment tokens like cryptocurrencies. These are used as means of transactions. And one Bitcoin, for example, which is one of those cryptocurrencies, equals another Bitcoin. It is fungible. Sorry, it is fungible in the same way that a dollar equals another dollar. On the other side of the spectrum, we have non-fungible tokens, which are really the representation of unique asset. One of those tokens is different, will always be different from, and its value cannot be interchanged with another token within that same ecosystem. The same way that a painting by Picasso doesn't have the same value as another painting by Picasso, if you will. So the whole concept of, it both relies on both blockchain, which means that the information about that token cannot be duplicated or altered. It is it's a proof of ownership. Once you own the token, the blockchain record shows that it is you, the holder of a particular wallet, that you have that token in your wallet, and it acts as a proof of ownership of authenticity. And with non-fungible tokens, you can you can connect the blockchain record to a digital image, one of those penguins and one of those crypto punks. So it is both the, it's a, how to put it, it is a way to connect both blockchain and a digital piece of artwork. And its value depends on how rare it is, on how scarce it is. And oftentimes they can be bought with cryptocurrencies, most of the time, and not most of them, more and more, actually even less so today, relying on Ethereum blockchain and Ether. So in a few words, and I know this is a lot to digest, but if we try to really dilute what NFTs are, they are a unique digital token, one of those little coins from a casino, that is traded on a blockchain network, and that is linked to an asset, linked to a piece of digital art. And its value is based on the number of tokens in circulation. The more rare it is, oftentimes the more expensive or the more valuable it is. And what is also associated with the NFT is oftentimes some sort of utility. So the holders of the NFT may get some benefits within the ecosystem in which they exist, such as access to VIP events or access to exclusive content, which therefore it really helps creates the community of collectors or enthusiasts who all own a token within that same ecosystem and who have access to particular events. And it becomes really this kind of exclusive club, if you will. And one of the benefits of NFTs is that there's the possibility of adding a royalty, an automated royalty through the smart contract that underlines that token, so that as soon as the NFT is transferred from wallet B to wallet C, a percentage of that price, of that sales price, goes automatically back to wallet A, the wallet that created the NFT in the first place, which in the context of art is very interesting, especially in the United States, where there's no federally recognized right to a resell royalty for living artists, as opposed to Europe. We'll get to that in a minute. I will not bore you with the details of how to make an NFT, but what you do need to know is that basically what it ends up being is the digital asset that exists, a photography, a photograph. It could be a piece of digital art with an audio visual component. It stays in a particular piece of storage, like on a computer or on a decentralized storage. A link is created, a link to that piece in storage is created, and what the NFT is really a representation of that link. It's not necessarily a representation of the asset itself. And this creates, from a legal perspective, creates some very interesting questions about what do you actually own when you purchase the NFT, because technically you purchase that link, but not necessarily the asset itself. There are so many ways to create NFTs, so many platforms that exist that allow any user to go on the platform and create an NFT and sell it and resell it indefinitely, and through the smart contract also indefinitely share some resale royalties back to the original maker. The way that the platforms differ is in their models, and some of them are open access, as in anyone can go in and create an NFT. Others are more invitation only and a little bit more curated in the way that there's an application process, and so it becomes more of a specific collection, and the platform has a little bit more control about the quality of the art. If we're talking in the context of art that is on their site, some sales are more in the auction format, where bidders have until a certain day and time to place their bids. Others are more, like an Etsy marketplace where you can purchase at any time. Some of them have sellers fees, others have buyers fees, the same way that exists at auction. And then there are different ways to set the royalties as well. Some platforms have very standardized royalties, as in the creator can only claim 10% of the sales price further down the line on the secondary market. Whereas other platforms allow the creator to set whatever percentage of royalties that they want back, which is also a very interesting thought process that must go into it. also because I'm a lawyer, we look at the legal issues in that NFT space, and we've been advising clients in that space specifically because, as I said, the NFTs really, really question the concept of ownership, as in the NFT is separate from the underlying asset that it represents, that video, that photograph, and technically selling an NFT amounts to granting to the purchaser a license. So usually it's a very limited license to display and resell the NFT for non-commercial reasons, as opposed to buying an NFT basically means acquiring a blockchain-based certificate of ownership. It's pretty much you're acquiring that link, and everything, that transaction is recorded on the blockchain. And it also gives you the right to display the NFT for non-commercial purposes. So this is where there's usually a lot of misconceptions around NFTs, and that buying an NFT just grants you the right to put it, to put it in a movie and sell it on a t-shirt, for example, which is oftentimes not the case. And there are different layers of intellectual property when it comes to NFTs. The first one is really the right to, you have the right to create the NFT itself, and the image may have some copyrighted materials, such as, I don't know, a photograph taken by somebody else, or it may have somebody else's likeness, like the celebrity's portrait or voice or name. It may also display or incorporate some trademarks, brand logos, slogans. So we have to think about whether the person who sold the NFT or who's selling the NFT has the rights to every piece of content that is in the image itself. And then once that asset is sold, those who purchase it have a certain limited amount of rights to use the NFT in a certain way. And as I said, it's oftentimes a non-commercial right to display the NFT. Very rarely does it include the right to edit, modify the underlying asset, the image itself. And very rarely does it include the right to create more works, more creative works based on the underlying asset as well. And the third layer is the resell royalty, which, as I said, like trickles back down to the original maker of that piece of art. We won't go into too many details, but there are a lot of rampant risks of copyright infringement in the NFT space, which unfortunately, the burden of monitoring the internet lies on the creators, of especially those who are really adamant about preserving their rights and their creations. There's so many other issues besides intellectual property. We can think about securities law. You may have heard that. It's still a little bit unclear whether owning fractionalized shares of one NFT amounts to trading securities, in which case it would trigger Securities and Exchange Commission overview. There may be also some issues in the context of gambling or sweepstakes law. And I know we're here talking about the global art market, but we also have to think about the potential that NFTs carry when it comes to laundering money. And there's still a lot of uncertainty about who's responsible for checking the identity of the people, the parties involved in a transaction. Oftentimes it relies on the wallet providers, those who are allowing access to anyone to trade and purchase cryptocurrencies, not necessarily the NFTs themselves. And so that there are a lot of laws currently being applied, but also currently being developed that would hopefully, or that are trying to regulate the potential for money laundering in the NFT space. And all of this is all very theoretical, but it actually isn't. There are so many instances of legal issues in that NFT space, in that And we see that every day, and every day we have new clients coming to us asking us what they can do with existing content, because that's one of the really cool things about NFTs is that they allow anyone who already has a portfolio of rights, of copyright, of artworks, to be able to do something new with them and generate some sort of revenue, but also create a community of people who want to support creative endeavors. At the same time, we have to ensure that those who are pursuing those endeavors actually have the right to do so. And for, you may have heard that a few months ago, Quentin Tarantino announced that he would be selling NFTs of unpublished scripts of Pulp Fiction, which Miramax, the distributor of the film, has strongly disagreed with. And there is an ongoing lawsuit where Miramax is basically saying that Tarantino does not have the right to do that at a time where their contract that they entered into, in the 90s, obviously could not have envisioned that NFTs would even be a thing. And so now the question is about the interpretation of the rights that each of those sides actually have. Also, recently, Hermès, the French luxury brand, is also recently filed a lawsuit against the creator of the Meta Birkins. It's a couple of guys who are creating digital replicas of the iconic Birkin bags. And now Hermès is suing on the basis of trademark infringement and trademark dilution because, and they're alleging that the Mason Rothschild, the guy who created those Meta Birkins, is basically confusing consumers about the source of those Meta Birkins and confusing consumers and basically saying that Hermès is endorsing the project, which they are clearly not. So this is all very practical and ongoing, and so the legal community is paying very close attention to that. I think on that end we're going to talk more about what NFTs mean for the global art trade.
Thank you, Louise, for that. I just kind of wanted to see if I've got my head around it. So if I decided that I wanted to do a really cool fundraiser for the World Affairs Council of Maine, I could create through one of those open source platforms an NFT of the recording of this webinar, and then auction it off to the highest bidder. But if I did that, I'd probably be in trouble with you because I didn't get copyright or permission to use your intellectual property. Is that kind of like, that's exactly.
Yes, that's exactly it. You listen closely, and I love this. I'm also, I'm using materials that don't belong to me
complicated.
As well, so that's another level of questions. Yes.
So we might. Right. So you would sue me, but somebody might be suing you all over the creation of, okay. All right, Bill, you heard that. We're going to have that as part of our silent auction. What does this mean for artists? Is this something that's going to potentially harm artists, or could it be something that would actually empower artists? Because, I think about what happened with streaming and musicians, and there's a lot of, two sides of that coin on that. Is this similar? Could you tell us a little more about that? How does this
absolutely there, again, as you said, there are two coins to that two sides of that coin, really. The first thing to know is that right now NFTs represent 1.3% of Sotheby's overall revenues for 2021. So there's a lot of talk, but it also means that the actual revenues from those sales is very minimal, at least currently. And there's been some research by this one writer, Kimberly Parker, who scraped some data from a lot of the major NFT platforms. And what she was able to ultimately establish is that artists are not making any profits off of NFTs currently. There are the big names that you hear of, but at the same time, the smaller artists are trying to kind of rise to the top because there's a lot of noise right now in that space. But it doesn't mean that it's a lost opportunity or a lost cause, really. What's kind of cool about NFTs is that they offer an opportunity to get rid of the traditional gatekeepers, or that are forcing the traditional gatekeepers, the auction houses, the galleries, the art dealers, and they're forcing them to adapt to those models, that new distribution model for art. And it's a way to get, direct to consumer, if you will, and allow artists, those artists that have been traditionally kind of excluded from the art market, digital artists. There's always been that kind of reluctance to invest in digital art up until recently, because there is no way to really prove that someone owns the piece of art, or that digital representation, and now there is. So it's certainly, people are paying attention to it, and more brands and companies are also turning to this as a way to, as I said, monetize content. And so I think, but as I said, currently there's a lot of noise in that space. The great benefit, and that this is kind of the same way that streaming or online music marketplaces have changed the way that music is being distributed, is that potential for royalty now. Although in the music space, it's still very much a work in progress. And in the art space, because, as I said, at least in the US, there's no federally recognized right to a resale royalty on the secondary market. The NFT marketplaces and the smart contracts allow for an automatic percentage of those sales to be shared back to or sent back to the artist. So there's some, it's still a little bit clunky on that side still, and because there are issues between platforms. Like, let's say I create something on a platform, somebody buys it and then sells that NFT on a different platform. There's no the smart contract doesn't carry over between most of the platforms. So it basically means that once you're out of that ecosystem, out of that platform, the royalties are cut off and don't follow. So there are some proposals for improvements, and this is particularly in the case of Ethereum as the underlying blockchain for those transactions. But it's still very much a work in progress, and people are seeing the potential, and people are working on making this a worthwhile endeavor for artists across the board, really. Which also, I mean, brings me to another point, is really what the art market is trying to do now, and whether it's reacting or adapting the existing models. What NFTs are really is a way to represent ownership of a piece of art, whether it's digital or physical. And Allison, when you and I were talking, we were also wondering about pieces of art that exist in the real world, right? How is it possible to link an NFT to a physical piece of art? And yes, it is. And what it actually is, it turns out being just a digital representation of that piece, which basically means it's a blockchain-based certificate of ownership of that physical artwork. And I've had the opportunity to work with a couple of companies that, especially one in particular, that is offering this as a way to the holders of those secured and approved, verified NFTs can use that as a collateral for a loan, for example, instead of entrusting the physical artwork with a bank or with it can stay in storage, and then the NFT is what ends up being used as the collateral, or that ends up being traded instead of the piece of art itself. So it's a different way to look at assets. Yes. So
why would an NFT be safer or a better, what's the advantage to having this digital token in that situation to a certificate, like a paper certificate from Sotheby's with a stamp and a ribbon? What is the value added? Right. Here? Well, paper
paper is destructible, right?
Right.
You can lose your certificate, it can disappear in a fire, it can, it can end up being fake. And so what NFTs offer, because of their, it relies on blockchain technology, is really that added layer of verified information that is immutable. It's recorded on the blockchain and cannot be changed unless there is a consensus about changing the information that is in there. So what some companies are doing is they're basically creating a digital replica of that physical paper-based certificate of ownership, putting that on the blockchain, turning that into an NFT, and this is what ends up being traded, rather than this piece of paper that can disappear, or be lost or destroyed, God forbid.
So following in that line, because like you said, a certificate can be forged. But another, I'm jumping around in the questions a little bit, but it seems to make sense here that one of the dark sides of the art world is it's a great place to launder money, right? You can buy a very expensive piece of art, pay 10 times as much as it's actually worth as a way to, basically launder that money, park it somewhere. Is that a risk with NFTs? Does it make that easier to do? Or could it, again, is the inverse true, where because of all of this proof of ownership, it actually could cut down on money laundering?
Well, there was a good answer and a bad answer to this. So yes, the potential for money laundering in using cryptocurrencies is huge, and it most likely is currently in progress. Like we can't even fathom or even begin to trace back all of the funds that are currently traded on the blockchain. So on the one hand, yes, there are bigger potentials for money laundering. On the other hand, because wallet addresses, so those who are trading those cryptocurrencies, those wallet addresses are public. They're if you go to Etherscan, for example, which will tell you what a particular wallet has exchanged against what, to whom, there is a way to trace back the funds. The problem is who owns that particular wallet, because that ownership really of the wallet is where anonymity is a big part of the of that space. So yes, you can follow the funds, but you can't really follow the people. And because it is easy to create multiple wallets and to transfer from your wallet to another one of your wallets and then multiple again. So it is something that regulators are paying very close attention to. They're in the context of art, because there are specific, they are art specific regulations in the art market about the responsibilities of the art market participants, such as conducting know your customer checks and due diligence about the people, the parties involved in a transaction. When you add a layer of cryptocurrencies and blockchain and that layer of anonymity, this is where especially people in Europe, where the anti-money laundering directives are much more stringent, and there is a threshold, though. It applies only to transactions, I believe, above 10,000 euros. So, if people are trading NFTs below the $10,000 euro threshold, then they don't have, or if there is an art market participant involved, like an auction house or an art dealer, they don't have to perform those know your customer checks or due diligence. So there are ways to kind of circumvent the system. And one way that we know here in the US that this is inevitable, and that there will be more scrutiny on the art market specifically, or NFTs in general. So we try to tell our client to, even if you're not sure whether AML provisions apply to you, start doing your checks and start looking into who your clients are, especially, you know, when you start selling NFTs and using cryptocurrencies as a way to accept payments, for example, because you never know what's going to happen, and it is inevitable.
So if I were Sotheby's and I knew all of this regulation, I mean, if I'm part of the traditional art world, why would I even want to put my finger in this? I mean, how is the traditional art houses, art trade, art world reacting to this? Because it sounds very risky.
It is risky. It is also NFTs currently right now when I was looking into the revenue reports from Sotheby's, most of their revenues from last year was driven by a new generation of collectors and NFTs, and because the new technologies are bringing a new type of interested parties, interested people. So their auction houses are really seeing the potential to attract a new crowd, but also to develop a presence in the primary market and to work with living artists, which historically hasn't really happened. So it's a very interesting shift we're seeing right now. Sotheby's is also creating their own metaverse, and most of the major auction houses have started accepting crypto payments. With the way that I believe the way that they're doing it is before a sale is approved or before the transaction is approved, they do perform as much know your customer checks ahead of time as possible, ahead of the end of a sale, or trying to know who the people are involved, what people are involved in that particular bid or winning bid in particular.
So I want to ask one more question before we go to all the audience questions, because what you're just saying also makes me think, particularly when you talked about a whole new generation of collectors. Are NFTs going to change or influence what we understand as art?
Well, there's no simple answer to your question, but maybe another question is, what is art, right? And blockchain itself could be an art. It's the art of code. It's beautiful. I think it is right now. There's a lot of things out there. A lot of things are being created on a daily basis, and it's sometimes hard to really make an opinion for yourself about what is aesthetic, what works, what doesn't, and it is shifting our perception of what is beautiful, but also what's beautiful to someone may be somebody else's trash. Isn't that a saying? I think it should be. So it is shifting the way that we look at art. It also is shifting the way that artists are working together. And one artist that may be working in a more traditional medium may be now turning to NFTs and collaborating with musicians, working with technologists. So it is also kind of shifting the way that media is working together. And I don't know, it's an exciting time.
I mean, is there a risk of trivializing it? I mean, one of the first questions that came up is, can we start considering emojis as digital art?
Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
I guess.
And what is art is really what you consider to be art. So, and who are we to judge? I think is maybe a very naive answer, but I don't know, anything can be art. So.
Yeah. Do you envision, this is another question from the audience, do you envision museums that, I mean, is there going to be a space, and will it be a physical space, or there already are museums in the metaverse?
Oh, in the metaverse, absolutely. In the real world as well. In Decentraland, which is one of those metaverses, there is a museum district where there are multiple museums, and people can connect and connect their NFT collections to the metaverse in Decentraland and display their own digital collections onto the art. Sotheby's also has a replica of their flagship there, and so you can, as a user, you can walk into the metaverse Sotheby's and look at exhibitions of pieces that are currently for sale at auction in the real world, and you can even place your bids in the metaverse. And real estate companies are now creating their own spaces in the metaverse. Like lawyers are starting to have offices in the metaverse. It's the next place to be.
Okay, so my head is about to explode. I'm sorry. What you're saying, no. This is really good, because this is why we invited you here, because we really want to understand this. So if I understand what you're saying correctly, and this is a question in the chat, the entire NFT transaction can actually take place in the metaverse.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
That right?
Mm-hmm.
Without ever coming into actual reality. They can be traded right there in the metaverse.
Yep. Absolutely.
Amazing. Yeah.
I do know that we wanted to talk a bit about the environmental impact of
yes, that is a
NFTs.
Big question right here. Yep.
So that is absolutely true. The big issue here is specifically Ethereum, one of those blockchains that underlines the majority of NFTs, has a huge computational power demand, as in the more people are on the network at a given time, the more energy it requires, and then it incurs what we call gas fees, and it also creates more energy. It requires more energy that is then contributes to global warming, basically. There are alternatives and solutions to that, and the solution is use different blockchains that use less computational power, that are less demanding on the computers, really. And it's just the way that Ethereum is constructed, in that the computers that are part of that network are just solving very complex equations, basically, and it requires a lot of energy. But there are ways to simplify that, and that's what other blockchains are now putting forward as a way to step away from contributing to global warming, basically. There are other issues, as we mentioned, like risk of copyright infringement that is extremely rampant. There are interoperability issues, like I mentioned, that resell royalties set on one particular platform don't necessarily transfer to another platform. And same right now, there are some issues between, you may have an NFT in your wallet, but depending on the metaverse that you're interested in being a part of, you may not be able to connect that wallet and that NFT to the metaverse that you want to be a part of. And it is also, the technology is advancing every day, which also means that the legal framework is changing every day, and we try to keep up with it. It goes very fast, and it's a very interesting space to be in, for sure.
It almost sounds like the metaverse is starting to replicate some of the problems that we have on Earth, where you're going to need metaverse passports, metaverse currency exchanges. Sure. Metaverse, like you're going to see the exchange shop there. Mm-hmm. Just coupling on the environmental aspect, are there alternatives to NFTs? And there's a question here, understanding that digital art can still be copied by people who don't own NFTs, that there's ways using JPEGs to actually kind of create the same certificate of ownership digitally, but without a.
I'm not sure that I understand the question. Hang on, let me try to find it.
Yeah, digital art can still be copied and used by people who don't own the NFT.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
And that's the big issue. Like, anyone can right-click on an image anywhere online and make an NFT out of that. And this is where we're seeing a lot of issues currently, and unfortunately at this point there is no real way to solve that problem, except by having lawyers involved, which is not necessarily a good thing. So yes, anyone can go in, copy and create an NFT of something that they don't own, but at the same time, because the blockchain record is transparent, there is a way for for people who haven't actually, who actually own the copyright to that particular image or asset, to be able to say, hey, I did not issue this. This is not mine. Don't buy, the NFTs that someone else is saying that they are selling on my behalf. It's not mine. So
Yeah.
it's not a perfect solution. It is something that's possible in the meantime.
So if I were a traditional artist and I've created a sculpture or something, how can I defend my art from becoming an NFT or even a piece of digital art? Would I do just that? Would I basically sort of put out a disclaimer saying that this can never be sold as an NFT?
There's both on the legal side and on the communication side, there are different solutions. Like the first thing is whenever you're creating a piece of art, register your copyright with the Copyright Office. Like that should be step one for all of your artists out there, because it is a proof that you're the author, and it is an extra layer of protection should you want to file a lawsuit against the person who's infringing on your copyright. So that's the legal side. And then, there's getting lawyers involved and such. But on the communication side, it's always possible to put out a disclaimer. If you have a Twitter account, put that in your bio. If you have a website, put that on there very clearly and say, I will not and will never provide, make and mint NFTs. Anyone who is saying that I am, this is not true. But this also has to be thought of in a strategic way, because if in 5 years you decide that you do want to make NFTs, like this, it should be a bit of a strategic thinking behind this. But this is more of a business type decision. But yes, there are ways to communicate that this is not yours, and putting it on social media and such.
So, following on that, a couple people have asked variations on so I buy an NFT. How do I enjoy it? How do I hang it up in my house? How do I, can I print it off either on a piece of paper or using a 3D printer? And then does that make it something else? I mean, how do I enjoy?
So oftentimes, so as I said, the rights that you as a purchaser get after when purchasing an NFT, the terms of the license that you acquire are often in the terms and conditions of the platform. But they often just say you can display the piece of art in any way that you want, so long as it's not for a commercial reason. As in, you're not putting this as your and I'm going to try to come up with some examples here. You're not going to turn the NFTs into the logo for your business, or you agree not to put the NFT on your business website, or use the NFT in an advertising for your art gallery, for example, except if you're trying to sell the NFT itself. But it has to always be connected to a very specific purpose, a very specific use, which most of the time has to be non-commercial. And the way that you could do that is, yes, you can. So you can do pretty much everything, so long as it stays within those boundaries. So you can absolutely print the NFT or the piece of art associated with the NFT, put that on your wall, turn that into a canvas. Again, you can display this in your home, so long as there's no commercial aspect to this. And
So
sorry.
I could even share it with a museum, for example. I could give my NFT on loan to a museum and allow them to display it, but I couldn't use it in a Super Bowl commercial.
Exactly. Yes.
Let's see, there's some other questions here. This one I'm going to read carefully because I'm not sure I understand it.
Okay.
It says, really interested to know if you know how countries with legislative artist resale royalty rights are dealing with NFTs that have royalty rights built into their smart contracts.
That's a very interesting question, Mia. I know Mia from back when I was at the center, so great to see your name. I haven't heard of any particular country that has, just for background for everyone, especially in the European Union, most countries have adopted a uniform way to look at resale royalties for living artists that are based on different thresholds. I haven't seen anything about ways that these are being the resale royalties and NFTs are being dealt with by countries. The big question right now is that technically in the, for example, if we look at European legislation that really sets those different thresholds, the percentage of the royalty is based on the profits that are being made between each sales, as opposed to what is set forth in most smart contracts is that the percentage is based on the overall sales price. So the profits being, the purchase price on the previous sale, or the purchase price on that secondary sale minus the purchase price on the sale beforehand is completely different than the total overall sales price. So there may be some legal questions there to dig further into. I haven't done that personally, but Mia, if you're interested, maybe we can connect and look deeper into this. But this is all that I can think of right now on top of my head.
Like I said, my head is still exploding because of all of the layers of complexity upon complexity upon complexity. And it certainly is a rabbit hole. So this is a question that I had. How on earth can we regulate this phenomenon at the national or the international level? Because we've talked about money laundering, tax evasion. Is there any way that states, that international bodies can regulate this, or is it really all about lawyers?
Is there a way to regulate this? Yes and no. There's a way to regulate this through cryptocurrency regulation specifically. And a lot of states in the United States, a lot of countries have already started regulating the money transmitters that are cryptocurrencies. NFTs being such specific assets, and it doesn't seem like it's even feasible to regulate them. But the big issue, not the big issue, but the whole reason why blockchain even exists is that the inventor of Bitcoin, a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto, was interested in having a decentralized system where there's no one central authority that would regulate the way that assets are being exchanged, cryptocurrencies in this case, the Bitcoin. So having regulations on top of cryptocurrencies or even blockchain as a whole, one seems kind of, it's very hard to implement, but at the same time, it kind of goes against the whole ethos behind cryptocurrencies and blockchain. So there will definitely, if there is even regulation that can be applied, there will be a lot of, a huge learning curve for the regulators, but also a lot of pushback from the community. Not that they don't want any governmental purview, but that they want to be, the system is made to be self-regulated. Because it relies on trust, security, and the transparency of the transaction. So why would we even need to regulate them? So there is, as to every major political issue, this NFTs are really, you can see this from those two different perspectives.
Oh boy.
I know.
I feel like we've spent an hour and talked about so many different angles, and you've told us so much, yet I feel like we've just cracked open the door in what is really a whole new universe in not just how we trade and sell art, but where we buy real estate, how we invest. And we're certainly in a whole new world. So thank you very much for, enlightening us on some of this. We really appreciate it.
You're
Bill?
very welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Loved all of the great questions. I will share my PowerPoint with Allison and Bill, so they will make those available for those of you who want to dig deeper into NFTs. And again, my presentation is only the beginning of this whole rabbit hole that you may fall into. So good luck with that.
And I'm gonna make an NFT out of it. That's my project. Thank you.
Well, I want to say thank you. Thank you also,
to
Louise, for shedding light on this rapidly evolving change in the art trade and beyond. I have to admit, a few years ago, if someone had said to me the term or the word metaverse, I would have been convinced it was a galaxy far, far away. But apparently I've learned a great deal tonight. It's not far away at all. It's right here and right now. So this was very interesting. So again, we appreciate you giving us a very informative overview of this, and also for addressing the questions. I want to thank our audience, as always, for your excellent questions, and we apologize. I don't know, Allison, did we get to everyone's questions tonight? We might have.
Almost, Gail.
Almost made it. Okay, well, thank you for your questions.
But most of them. Yeah.
And once again, thank you to our sponsors, Abigail Carroll, Bill and Nancy Hall, and of course, one of our biggest sponsors of everything we do, Harry Conkle, and to our World Affairs Council community. Now, for a change, our next program will be in the morning and in person. I'm pleased to announce the resumption of the Governor's International Breakfast on Friday, March 25th. Please check our website. And we'll take a brief pause from our Wednesday night webinars in April and May in order to make room for your schedules for Great Decisions 2022, which begins on April 5th at 7 p.m. So please stay tuned for that. And I want to say again, thank you, Louise, and thank you very much, Allison, for being such an excellent moderator. This was a good program, and I want to say good night to all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Have a great evening.
Have a great night.
Recording will be up tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.